Scotland. So what is this session about? So Upstart Scotland campaigns for the kindergarten stage in Scottish education. If you're not too sure what any of that means, don't worry about it. They're going to explain that to you. And really, a kindergarten stage is about giving children more time to thrive and develop. So in this first of these occasional talking point sessions, we are really, really delighted to welcome Upstart to share information about their campaign, because they are a campaign group, to start this discussion about what learning through play means. And hopefully you leave here today carrying on that conversation with your friends, and especially with your parent group members, and spreading the word. And I'm sure soon Willie will have some more calls to action for you as well. And finally, they will highlight what a kindergarten stage in Scotland might look like as well. So quite exciting to hear this. If you don't know about Connect, and this is the first time coming into contact with us, hello and a big welcome to you. We are a charity membership organisation for parent groups across Scotland. Currently, we have 26 local authorities that take out a membership for parent councils, and out with that, any other parent group like parent teacher associations and other parent-led groups can take out their own membership with us as well. So we're all about partnerships in education, and really about enhancing and supporting the voice of parents in education. We use surveys and these sort of information sessions to engage with our members and other people, to help us to hear what's happening on the ground, and to prioritise not only our own work, but to try and influence the work of others. Connect members have access to a number of different supports from us here, but even if you're not a Connect member, you can have a look on our social media platforms where we do share some information. If you're interested in becoming a Connect member, then please do get in contact with us. Okay, now I'm just about to hand over to Willie and Sue, but I just wondered if we wanted to have a quick look at the chat to see what people were saying. I don't know if Tina managed to go on, or if one of my other colleagues is able to just speak us through some of the feedback that we got here from the chat about what learning through play means to them, or whether play is important or not.
Yeah, I am here. Hi, everybody. Had technical hitches, but we do. So there's lots of, I guess, quite technical things that people are saying. Play means the ability to incorporate sensory and motor skills in social and emotional learning. Learning through play means allowing children to lead learning. Play is learning. Learning happens naturally through play. Play is essential for learning. It forms the base of everything. And Emma says her school has a hybrid approach to play-based learning in P1 and P2, some free play, as well as teacher-directed and teacher-initiated. So, and we got my colleague Fiona says learning through play for her youngest means that he can follow his interests. So, wide range.
Quite a mix there though, so I'll leave that for Sue and Willie to have a think about, but I am now going to hand you over to Upstart Scotland to begin this session, this talking point session. So I'd like to thank you both first of all for coming along tonight and joining us. Really delighted to welcome you and everybody else that's here tonight. The presentation will begin with Sue Palmer, who is the Honorary President of Upstart Scotland. She's also a trained teacher. She became an independent writer, presenter and literary specialist, I can't say that, for over 35 years. And Willie French will speak after Sue. He is the chair of Upstart Board of Trustees. He's a head teacher and has worked across all areas of education for the last 40 years. So thank you so much. I'll now hand over to you, Sue. Thanks.
Thanks very much indeed, and thank you to Connect for inviting us along. It's a real privilege to be the first in this series. So if we could click onto my first slide, thank you. Upstart's a campaign, as Diane said, about a kindergarten stage, and the word kindergarten, it causes some problem because people think, is it nursery? What is it? It isn't nursery. In terms of European practice, nursery would be basically just for babies up to the age of about 3. A kindergarten, the idea was started in the 19th century by Frederick Fribble, and it's got a long and honourable history. It's about that age range between 3 and 7, which is a really precious one from the point of view of children's development. And it's a method of education, care and education, which is very well understood by many educators on the European mainland and is normal in places like Finland, Sweden, Estonia, Denmark, Norway, and Germany, because it's been going for ages. Names like Maria Montessori from Italy and Malaguzzi from Italy mean that it works there as well. And it's really the British, if we could have the next slide, please, that just don't get this, because we have this strange, very, very early starting age. It's only really the British Empire that sends children to school at the age of, well, 4 or 5. The majority of countries start at 6 and would have kindergarten type education up to and before that. And so do those who start at 7. And it tends to be the ones that start at 7 now in a 21st century world that are doing the best in education and in children's well-being. So the next slide, that's why when we, oh, sorry, could you click it through? When we launched it at Upstart in May 2016, and I think there's something else on there that you can click, sorry. Yeah, rights focused, relationship centered and play based as often as possible outdoors. Next slide, please. The people who were there at that launch weren't just representing education, they were representing many disciplines, because this is to do with children's all-round development. School is about academic development, basically, although, you know, nowadays we're a bit more humane than we were in Victorian times. But it was people from social justice and violence reduction, because they knew that if we concentrate on children's development when they're young, that's going to be good for society. It was people from health. We actually have a professor of public health on Upstart's board, because if we get it right in terms of development early, that's the beginning of lifelong well-being. So children's rights, developmental neuroscience, we had at that launch a guy called Colwyn Trevarthen, who was one of the most famous names worldwide in terms of evolutionary biology and developmental neuroscience. So if we could click to the next slide. This is what it's about. It's about the fact that we are actually designed by evolution, as it were, to develop certain skills and capacities. And in other countries that have kindergartens, this is understood. But in the UK, we tend to think, oh, well, you know, once they can talk and walk, that the next thing is getting them to school and getting on with it. But it's this absolutely vital biological process whereby the genetic predispositions that are in there, because it's in our genome, are expressed due to the sorts of experiences children have in this very precious period of early childhood up to the age of about 7 or 8. And people talk about strands: social, emotional, physical, cognitive. All these things have to develop, but that's a very sort of scientific construct. If Diane, next slide, please. It's not really strands, it's a biological mesh. It's holistic. So you can't say first this happens, then that happens, then the next thing happens. It'll be different in every child. It'll be different in every place, because the people are different and the landscape's different. But it will involve the sorts of experiences that have helped children develop into healthy, bright, balanced people throughout the whole of the millennia. And in order to do that, we need the sorts of things that have helped that development throughout life. So if you click to the next step, these are some of the, again, it's a very simplistic slide, because we're looking at it from a grown-up point of view, and these things are developing bottom up, and they're all sort of jarbled up together in terms of what the child is doing. But Without them, you're going to be in a sorry state throughout life. And if we rush children into formal education without giving them the opportunity to develop all these different abilities in the way that nature expects them to, that's not going to have long-term good consequences. Next slide, please. So they need both nurture and nature. And the two things that lucky children have had throughout the millennia in every culture are very simple. If you could click, Diane. They're very obvious. They need love from the grown-ups who look after them. That helps keep them alive, but fortunately it also gives them this feeling of being loved. If people care about you and want to spend time with you and are interested in what you're doing and what you say, you feel as though you're worth your place on earth, as the Proclaimers put it. It makes people feel a sense of self-worth, and that is hugely significant for long-term resilience and for one's sort of image as a learner. Along with the love, they also need play, and that comes from the children because it's their inborn learning drive. It's what makes them, from the minute they're born, want to imitate and discover and experiment and find things out and make a mess and generally do all the things that children do that adults on the whole think are pretty pointless but are actually vital to their development. Next slide, please. But over the last 50 years, love and play have both been changed enormously by changes in our culture. It was really the 80s that things started to change badly, really considerably, because we got huge improvements in production methods and so on because of information technology. And suddenly you couldn't let your kids go out to play anymore because of the traffic. And because we're becoming a much busier and more overcrowded world, communities are different. I was born in 1948, so was sent out to play at the age of about 2.5 or 3 with the other kids, the big kids looking after the little kids, which is a vital part of early development. And they did too, because they knew that if they didn't, somebody's granny would give them hell. But you can't do that anymore. So increasingly, play for younger children is indoors, not often with many other kids, and very often it's screen-based. At the same time, love was getting changed by the fact that around about the 80s again, competitive consumer capitalism became the guiding force economically of the planet. So we were all under huge pressure from marketing. And suddenly love is being transferred into play is you've got to have things to play with that you've got to buy. And love is, oh, can I afford to buy them the things? And the children are under a massive pressure from marketing as well, because they think they've got to have stuff in order to be worthy along with their peers. So there's these pressures coming that's changing the way we relate to each other. And in school, suddenly in the 80s, there was this sudden access through IT to increasing amounts of data. And it meant that we moved into a measurement and accountability culture in schools that hadn't been there before. And that puts pressure on children as well, because teachers are constantly having to track their development and have they reached this stage yet? The teachers are under pressure, the schools are under pressure, and indeed, as I'm sure you're aware, the parents are under pressure, because we're all thinking, oh gosh, is it going to be okay? Will she be coping with what they've... So love and play have been very much changed by what's happened over the last 40 or 50 years of culture. Next slide, please. And I fear that that is why we're seeing so many of these dreadful headlines. 20 years ago, I, along with a lot of other experts in various aspects of children's development, wrote a press letter in which we actually predicted all this, and it is of no satisfaction whatsoever to see it happening. But once you've got to the stage where mental health problems among children are going through the roof, and almost a half of our kids have additional support needs. And next one, please. We're seeing huge increases in problems with behaviour, and of course the famous attainment gap, which the Scottish Government have thrown £1.7 billion into over the last 10 years without making the slightest difference. It's still getting wider because children from less advantaged homes have poorer development usually when they arrive at school. The only way to give them, to help close that gap, is to give longer and more support for development before we start formal schooling. So next slide, please. Just to finish off, this is what we mean by the difference between a kindergarten and school. Basically, it's not a question of we need to change funding. The funding is there already because children are in nursery at the moment from 3, or can be, they're funded. What we want to make sure is that between 3 and 7, the ethos is a kindergarten ethos. Particularly good if we can get the 3 to 7-year-olds together, which I think over time it would be possible to do. The building stock's there, the people are there. We have Froebelian experts in Scotland, so we can do the training. But we need to change it so that the emphasis is on development, that the children are outdoors in nature in the way that their brain has been developed to expect, that they're getting the right sort of caring interest and support from the people, hopefully very knowledgeable people who are looking after them, and that nobody is being held back. Those kids who develop an interest in reading or writing or sums or science or whatever it is would be supported at the level appropriate to them. And by the time they're 7, I've seen in Finland and in Germany, by that time, the majority of kids are fine to get started on a more formal approach to literacy and numeracy and the rest of it. So, next slide, please. If you want to know more about us, I'll try to be as quick as I could. There's our details, and you can get in touch with us through info@Upstart Scot down at the bottom. And if anybody wants to get hold of me for anything, that's my email address there. I hope I managed to do that in a quarter of an hour, which is what I promised, because I wanted to be able to hand over to Willie French, who's the chair of Upstart and who has nowadays much closer contact with the system and has been a head teacher in the Lothians for 40 years, well, 40 years in education. So Willie, could you switch on your microphone and...
Yeah, thank you very much, Sue. I hope everyone can hear. Thank you very much. Like Sue said, we'd like to thank Connect for this opportunity, and it's a real privilege to speak to those who've joined the meet. I don't have any slides. I may refer to some of the slides that Sue used. I just want to give a bit of context. So I've been in primary education for 40 years. And 27 of those years, I've been in the position of being a head teacher. I've worked for several different local authorities. I've worked for schools with different socio-economic contexts. I've worked in schools of different sizes. My first head teacher post was a 3-class school where the head teacher really had the roles and responsibility of everything from cleaning to cooking meals to the education. And my last post was head teacher of a school with nearly 1,000 primary pupils. So I hope that that you'll respect that the context that I come from is based on my experience. So it's an honest account, and I hope that I don't offend anybody, because that's not my my intention. My intention is really to give an honest kind of an honest summary of my my understanding and where I think early years in primary education is at the moment. So we rush, we push, and we present children to formal education far too soon and far too quickly. And what I have realised and what I've learnt over, I would say, the last 12 to 15 years of my career is that as a nation, we lack an understanding of what Sue refers to as a developmental approach. And by that, I mean everyone in the school community, which may sound worrying, may sound illogical, but I think parents, carers, and many professionals really don't have an understanding of this developmental approach. And that's not a slight on my teacher colleagues, because I think the teaching profession is hugely committed and very hardworking and very conscientious. But I think there's a lack of training and a lack of awareness that covers this whole developmental approach. So we seem to have been doing the same thing for around about 150 years. It seems to be that the approach is we always do it like this, or we always do it this way, or as we'd say in Scots, it's I been like this, it's I been this way. But I don't make any apology for using this language, because what I've seen over the last number of years is actually what we do at primary one and around that earlier stage is actually presenting a lot of harm and a lot of damage to children. And not just children, but what I'm seeing is the impact that this is likely to have on the future of our society. You know, at the moment, there are so many high profile negatives. The state of the country's health, the state of the country's mental health. What I'm seeing is a lot of behaviours being referred to, and I think that a lot of that is linked to a child's early experience of formal education, resilience, and the lack of children to be creatively and in their thinking. So one of the things that I found interesting as my head teacher career developed was when you were doing these transition events from nursery to P1, and you'd be chatting to parents in terms of making them feel welcome and preparing their child for school. And quite often parents and carers would use that term, my child's ready for school. But the longer I've been in the profession, I'll be quite honest, I haven't got a clue what ready for school actually means. And neither do I think the parents and carers. And I don't mean that as a slight. I just think that, there is a lack of awareness. And we need to raise this awareness, which is one of the real aims of our campaign, apart from our ultimate aspiration of introducing a kindergarten stage. I think we also have to we have to raise awareness of the harm and the damage that we're doing to children by starting formal education or formal learning far too early. Sue's third slide, I just think is really telling. 88% of the rest of the world are starting children in formal education at either 6 or 7. We're starting some children not that long after they're 4.5. So it doesn't take a lot of explaining to understand that 1.5 years, or in some cases 2.5 years, of 22% of the world, we're introducing children to a formal style and system of education. And of course, the Give Them Time campaign was very successful in deferrals. So, in some areas, some families may be very successful in the deferral application, which means that we're actually extending that period between the youngest and the oldest starting formal education. We're pushing it to nearly the best part of 2 to 2.5 years. So why are we still doing this? In Sue's 7th slide, I just thought, in June and July of a child's preschool, they're in an environment where there's a play-based, relationship-centered approach, much of it outdoors, and yet 5 weeks later, in August, so you get June, July, August, 5 weeks later, they're in a class-based, sedentary environment, sitting at chairs often sitting at desks indoors with an expectation that they can respond to things by way of worksheets, the learning and the teaching of formal literacy and numeracy, and quite often they're facing lessons on an interactive whiteboard. So Sue's 7th slide was about the tug, and there is absolutely no doubt that the agenda in this country set by the Scottish Government and the agencies that serve the Scottish Government, like Education Scotland and so on, the tug is on the cognitive part, because the focus is on raising attainment in literacy and numeracy. The focus is on learning and teaching. It's not developmentally focused. So the children's physical, emotional, and social development is being pulled out of sync, as Sue's slide quite rightly pointed out, because of this focus on cognitive at far, far too early and far too young a stage. We're killing children's curiosity. We're killing children's creativity. They are not being given the autonomy and the opportunity to apply their own problem-solving skills, their own planning skills, and we're certainly putting up barriers to developing their adaptability, because in the August, when they transfer to school, very much of their experience is teacher and adult-led. So there's a lack of opportunities to develop empathy, social skills, and skills of collaboration. I think Sue's slides 11 and 12, where there's a 600% increase in mental health issues, 2 in 5 pupils with additional support needs, high-profile reports about pupil violence and behavioural issues, and the attainment gap widening. It's all very negative and all quite depressing if you were to actually digest all of that stuff with some regularity. But in my head teacher experience, as I said, we're starting children far too quickly, we're pushing them far too early, and we quite often speak about the argument of ready versus able. I, over the last number of years, have identified lots and lots of children who I have no doubt are very able in many aspects of their development, but they're not quite ready. One of the other experiences that I've had regularly as a head teacher, and I think this is very worrying, and it's very much linked to the number of pupils with ASN and the level of support that is needed, is, if I can be anecdotal, I've had a number of teachers over the last few years, within 5 or 6 weeks of children being in primary 1, I'm called along, I'm asked to observe the behaviours or the presentations of several children, and the teachers will say to me, "Oh, you know, there's no doubt this child will have to be referred. I'm thinking, I'm not qualified, but you know, I'm thinking there might be a touch of autism in there, or maybe some ADHD, and you know, and I think, you know, this child might have to be medicated." And teachers are actually, you know, they're fumbling in the dark, because it's quite simple. Children are being presented with tasks. Children are being presented with an environment that they're not ready to cope with. And that is why they present with behaviours that teachers find difficult to manage. And that's why, if we had a kindergarten stage to bridge, I don't know, I mean, this is my own language, you know, I'm trying to put it in a kind of easy to explain way. If that was the bridge between the start of a formal learning experience and what we would term the end of their nursery experience, this kindergarten stage would give them the opportunity to be developmentally ready, to be ready. Here's an anecdote. My own son's a primary teacher, and he's, by his own admission, he's not proud of it, he's never read a book in his life. When I say he's never read a book, he's never read a novel. He's read novels to his class, but he himself has not read a novel. And when we have a conversation about it, he'll say, "Dad, I had to read about Biff, Kipper and Chip before I was 5. He said it was really dull and I didn't know how to read. And he said it's put me off reading since I was that age." And that is true. And that's just an example of, you know, the damage that we're doing when we introduce formal education far too early. And I suppose my biggest concern over the last few years was the introduction of the Scottish National Assessments. at primary 1, primary 4 and primary 7 to coincide with the end of a level within Curriculum for Excellence. And I don't object to some kind of assessment at primary 4 and primary 7 to gauge how they're doing. But to test primary 1s, to assess primary 1s formally on a laptop, there are so many skills that they're not developmentally ready. But I'm going to use the word, it was cruel to watch some of these children. Absolutely cruel, because they were stressed, the teachers were stressed. It's a complete waste of time, and it's a complete waste of money because it costs the Scottish Government millions. And I'm only going to be honest, and I know this from speaking to colleagues, there's far, far too much information, and the data that comes out of the tests is actually not used to plan any of their learning or their education. But what worries me is the stress that the children, the stress that I observed children presenting when they were presented for this SNSA test. We've got a ready-made set of guidelines in a document called Realising the Ambition, which ties in and dovetails very nicely with the early level of Curriculum for Excellence. And if we were to actually take this document on, take these guidelines on, it would be not perfect, because nothing is, but it certainly would be a hugely supportive set of guidelines for what we would be looking to introduce as a kindergarten stage. Unfortunately, a lot of these things have been hijacked by the political agenda, the agenda of raising attainment and closing the attainment gap. So that's the reason why what I was seeing in school, if I depart from early years a little bit, if I go up the school to anything between P3 and P7, I think that the impact of introducing children too early to formal education is having a huge effect. They're not ready, they're not motivated, but actually it doesn't develop their ability to concentrate, it doesn't develop their ability to focus. And I think we're then starting to address these things at primary 4, 5, 6 and 7, which is far too late. So, why are we parking the bus there when we should really be using the bus way, way earlier? I think children are struggling to build resilience, and that presents through behaviour. A personal bugbear that I have is that in the later years in primary school, we're using manufactured packages, programs to build resilience, programs to develop children's rights, that's based on a very, very American style approach on rewards and incentives, which we have to pay for these packages. These are the values and these are the skills that children would learn if we didn't push them into formal education far too early, where they're able to build resilience and build their own rights and their own values through a developmental approach. Far, far too much is based on extrinsic motivation rather than the children developing the motivation for themselves. Sue mentioned that a kindergarten stage would not be holding children back. We recognise that would be a worry for parents and carers, but I think that's a bit of a myth, because if we had highly skilled and highly trained staff who were very skilled at observations, we would be identifying children who were mature enough and were ready enough to be introduced to the early stages of literacy and the early stages of numeracy. So this is maybe not 100% based on our Upstart campaign, but it's very much something that occupies my mind. I'm going to leave you with this finally. I'll leave you with a question to ponder and think about. We use the terms school, we use the term education, and we use the term learning and teaching. But I think we don't often stop as a society and as communities, we don't often stop to think about what is the purpose and the aspiration of a school or a school community. Because as someone who's 40 years in the profession and is passionate about how children are doing, we need to change. The present system doesn't work. It's out of date and we keep doing the same. So we need to get the word out there. We need to create a culture where society understands about a developmental approach, and we need to install that approach in the early years as a bridge between nursery and primary education. So that's my take based on my head teacher experience. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Willie. And so that is a lot to take in. I'm sure everyone here is processing a lot of what you have just presented to us. And thank you so much for all the information, all the context around the Upstart campaign. And it's really helpful, I think, hearing the views and experiences, particularly given that both of you do have, direct experience working in schools and education as well. It's quite helpful for that context, because I think as parents, as a parent myself, and that we work directly with parents through our parent council members and other parent group members, is there is a lot of fear and anxiety, and there's a lot of unknown, and it's trying to always balance out what you believe is best for your child as that individual parent who knows their children best normally, and societal expectations and pressures. What's your neighbour doing? What's your friend doing? What is the nursery teacher telling you? What is your granny telling you? What's your mum telling you? And it can be quite overwhelming, especially if you're a first time parent and you're going through that process of learning in that journey as a parent about what the right thing is to do. So I'm just going to I'll pose a question. I'm just open up the opportunity for everyone who's here tonight to, if they want to ask Sue or Willie a question, or even just make a comment if you haven't got a question yet. Or just thinking about, in terms of, especially for parent council members or some of our members, about how or maybe just generally, how do we empower parents? How do parents become more informed, become more aware of some of the things that you're saying, and what action can they take in terms of progress in some of the things that you were saying? But in terms of those sort of societal pressures, do you have any kind of anything to say about how parents, especially those first time parents, those kind of with children in nursery or early learning childcare settings for the first time, thinking about school readiness? And I say that with the big inverted commas around it, because I know you've both already said school readiness is not a helpful term, yet it's just now lots of families are involved in the transition period of people are moving on between classes and settings. And those words will be being used just now, and they will be meaning different things for different people. So I suppose the question is then, how can we support parents to have that better understanding about what is best for their child, in terms of your suggestion that child development should be the centre of that? Is that a big question?
Is that a question? I'm sorry, I
know
lost
it's a question. I know. There was a lot of. I think there was a lot of me thinking about that as well. I suppose it's just thinking about, it's difficult to think about the children's development in the centre of a world that's quite noisy, that's saying send your child to school. They've got to learn their numbers, they've got to learn their alphabet, they've got to socialise with their friends, they need to be able to put their jacket on, they need to be able to go to the toilet, they have to carry their tray and when they get into primary school at dinner time. I suppose, how do we reassure parents that these things are not the most important things about transitioning to school?
It's like that answer that the Irishman gave to the man that asked directions in a car, and he said, if I tried to go there, I wouldn't start from here. It's such a difficult question to answer, because both Willie and I believe that this whole business of children being ready has been totally misunderstood. It tends to be, the English government has just released another list of things that children will be able to do to be school ready, and it's basically suggesting that parents train them to be able to recognise these things, which is nothing to do with development. In fact, it's the absolute opposite to development. But of course, in a culture where that's what people require, it'd be a very, very brave parent that didn't do it. This is why, as Willie said, one of the points of Upstart is to try and get people to recognise the significance of child development as a biological process, and recognise that the early years cover birth to 8. Possibly and to support it, because that is the way to provide a foundation for lifelong. At the moment, we're stuck in a paradigm which is really not good for. And saying that, but then back when I was a head teacher in the 80s, I remember having quite a few conversations with very angry men who were very upset about belting in schools. Any harm, they said, all red-faced and cross. And we did manage to buy it. And then people understand this is the way. That's all I can say. You must recognise what readiness means, and developmental readiness is having enough resilience, enough language, enough capacity to focus that you can settle in a classroom, and that's something you can teach.
Yeah. Tina from Connect here is just so my for them and cancel learn happening to the end of the kind of direction, I suppose. So those are the actions that people can practically take.
Willie mentioned a document called Realising the Ambition, which is a developmentally appropriate, which published quite brilliant actually. If it's being followed, for us to be in this school. And I'm afraid one of the answers would be what Willie said, it's because we also have to do the primary one tests in literacy and numeracy. So the Scottish Government speak with full tongue. And
can, you know, again, can the child be into if they do, but they got to know about first those things.
we take life out of the posters, cards, and significant. It's the fact that throughout P1, everybody's having to do the practice, the teaching or learning results. Sorry.
I was hoping to come in. I think it's worth. The situation is quite complex. That's what is to change. So I understand possibly other people in the profession understand that Brexit has three conclusive level. Early level, the early level has to be achieved by the end of. So early level contains all levels. It can from teen to from the early which is if a child has achieved early level in literacy and numeracy. Now it bears absolutely. I've done these studies. You can have a child who you say has 100% reached their ASL their early level in literacy and numeracy in primary 1, and by the time they get to primary 3, they are struggling. So to support the whole kindergarten system, or the whole kindergarten idea, how can you say that you're presenting all of this cohort of primary 1 in one school, some of whom might be 4.5, some of whom might be near 6, and yet they all seem to be at the same place? It's just actually, schools are really just carrying out exercises so that they can submit this data. It's the furthest away from a developmental approach that you can get. But actually, I understand parents and carers will not understand that, because how can they? I don't understand everything a doctor does, or a dentist does, or a solicitor does, or an engineer does. That's difficult, but we have to raise this awareness. So if you're sitting a child down to look at a whiteboard, to look at a book, to undertake a worksheet, and they're not ready, if you sit down to watch a television program and you're bored within 10 minutes, do you stay on for the whole hour and a half? No, you switch the telly off, you go do something else. Well, that's what kids are doing when they can't be bothered doing, or not can't be bothered, when they're not developmentally ready to undertake the tasks that they're presented with. So it's really quite serious.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is a challenge. And I think Emma has kind of summarised it quite well there. She said, I think parents are lacking support from the start. They don't know enough about how children develop and so rely on what family did, the media. I think that's what I was trying to say at the start. I mean, maybe didn't come across very well. It's like, the world is telling you something as a parent, and it is quite hard to then balance that out with when you look at your child and you actually are thinking, I know that I don't want them to go to primary school at this age. But Emma said, my experience is that nursery staff feel that they're not allowed to influence parents, and she's put in brackets, for example, with regard to deferral. And even my own excellent nursery made no comment about my January born child being able to defer. Parents and even professionals do not have enough knowledge, and from my experience, they don't view play as learning, they are just playing, inverted commas, just. Yes, there is a lack of understanding that early level spans nursery and primary one. So I suppose in thinking about some of these things, we're thinking about how parents and parent council, some of our members might be able to go away and look at raising awareness even of these, particularly the building the ambition. I posted the link in the chat as I think one of you suggested, that that's a document that could be taken to a parent council meeting as a basis for a discussion, looking at play, looking at early level, looking at the expectations there. The question from Kristen about what examples are there of this sort of kindergarten style approach. Dawn's saying there are a few examples around the country. I don't know who's able to say anything more about those examples, about the sort of those sort of practices that might be developing across the country. Is anybody able to give some more information about that? What that looks like?
But there are a number of outdoor nurseries that have been able to extend to sort of kindergarten level because of some local authorities allow what's it called, when children are allowed to attend school for 2 days a week.
Flexi, like a sort of flexi schooling? Flexi
schooling, that's the word, sorry. So with the Secret Garden in Fife and Dawn's Nursery in Aberdeen, Mucky Boots, and various other ones have that sort of kindergarten. Sorry, I seem to have disappeared. Am I still there?
Yep, you're still here.
There are some outdoor nurseries that are doing the sort of approach you would see in Denmark or Finland, where children are out most of the day. I know there's one school in Aberdeen that's been attempting to do a kindergarten stage by bringing their nursery and their P1 and 2 together at certain times of the day. But I don't know whether folk are allowed to go visit them.
Yeah, I see what you mean, yeah, to get that sort of example. But I suppose people watching this video or who are attending here tonight know that there are examples that exist. So it's not so far away that, you know, there aren't steps being made to move towards these sort of styles of approaches. So that might be something to centre around a discussion about what's the starting point for our school or community or our local authority to move towards these sort of changes, if there are some that already exist.
The Wonnery in Edinburgh, I believe, in the South Morningside, was working in this direction, but I've not heard from them for a few years. So, and it's like Willie's school. When Willie left, it changed, so that you can never be sure whether things are carrying on. It needs to have a legal foundation. We need a proper statutory kindergarten stage for it to work. So the main examples would come from other countries like Finland and Estonia, where they're doing such great work that's really helping the kids develop their well-being and their learning.
We're just moving towards the 9 o'clock. I don't know how we've got to 9 o'clock so quickly. It feels like we just started again. So I just wonder, in terms of rounding it up, then in terms of your campaign perspective, do you have calls for action? How can parents get involved in your campaign? Are there important things coming up that parents could be listening to, following? And any other sort of last calls to action if parents are interested in, you know, as you're saying, these are small gradual changes. What can we do to get the first step going?
Well, if anybody wants to turn up tomorrow, we have the first of our book groups on a book called Born to Play. You don't need to Born to Play. You don't need to have read the book, but a real expert on Froebelian education, Dr. Lynn McNair, and I will be talking about that tomorrow night. So if you go on Eventbrite, Google Eventbrite Upstart, you can find your way to the tickets for that, and it's free on Zoom tomorrow. And Willie, can I pass on to you for other suggestions?
Yeah, then I would say that if parents and carers or people in this call, or anybody just generally in the wider population, is really interested and really passionate about this. You know, I think one of our missions has to be to raise awareness somehow. Although, you know, I think we've been really successful in the 10 years of our existence, and you know, the people on our board, especially Sue, have done a remarkable job. I think we really need to campaign our politicians, both councillors and local MSPs. And I think if if people feel really strongly, raising awareness with them, because you know, I think there's we're right in thinking that if we can change the kind of political landscape by way of a lot of people saying that they recognise that the present system is not working and it needs to be changed, it needs to be addressed. But if there's a swell of the public presenting that, then the politicians will hopefully take cognizance of it. So I think putting pressure on local councillors and local MPs. But I also think coming at it from a head teacher's perspective, I think there's a huge amount of information that's not shared by schools. And I'm not criticising my colleagues, but it's the pressure that they're under, not communicated by local authorities. I mean, sorry, I know it's 9 o'clock, but I've supported a number of families who wanted, and they're legally entitled to, apply for a blended model, a kind of part-time schooling, flexi schooling, and the local authorities completely and utterly veto it. They just do not support it, when actually legally they're actually obliged to offer that particular kind of provision. And I just see this, it's a similar kind of idea, problem, if you like, with our campaign is, for as long as the focus is on raising attainment and filling the news feeds with our reading ability is not as good as it should be, and our numeracy ability is not as it should be, and therefore the focus is on raising attainment in that area. As long as that's the agenda, it'll be difficult to change. But hopefully some parents will really start making some kind of waves about this. The Give Them Time campaign was successful, so hopefully we can jump in the back of that and be successful ourselves, because something has to change. It's not working.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just add, now that Willie's taken over the chairing of Upstart, thank you, Willie. I've got a bit more free time, so if people want talks, I might be available to give them if they want any.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you. Well, we've got a whole lot of questions here, so we'll maybe chat to you about some of these questions afterwards. But I did hear some calls to action there. I did hear a couple of routes of some parent carers or MD on this call tonight could take. Certainly getting discussions about play on the agenda, the building ambition on the agenda. School improvement plans are a good route for parents to feed into, having play at the centre of a priority within school. But thank you so much. It's just past 9 o'clock now, so I should wrap it up, because I know that people will be looking to go off and do something else. But
Diane, can I just say, this will take 10 seconds. Our website is outstanding, and if people have time, they should go and visit our website, full of research, full of really interesting articles, and you can just see the logic in our campaign. The website's great.
No, absolutely, and you've got that there with a live link to it that will open it up, so everyone will get the PowerPoint. I know somebody was asking for your email address, and there's 2 emails addressed there, and Willie left his email address too. Our email address is on the next slide if someone was asking for that. But yeah, I think that there's definitely room for more talking points. I think this discussion has just got started for us tonight, so hopefully there will be an avenue for us to continue this discussion at a later point. So just to say thank you so much again to Sue and Willie for coming along, opening up this exciting, very topical session for us, and I'm sure we will be catching up again in the future and looking to develop this conversation further. So just to say thank you to everyone that attended tonight. thanks for the questions. A poll's just popped up on screen just now. If you've got 3 seconds to answer 3 questions, that would be fabulous, just so we can see what people are thinking about from this session. And I hopefully will see you over the next couple of weeks before we finish up for the summer. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, and I'll call it a night now for us all. So I'll see you again soon. Thanks, and thanks to Sue and Willie once again.
Thanks, Dan.